Joining us now is Florida Senator Marco Rubio is back with us, and he has been working with Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul on this effort in the Senate. I guess, there's 15 of you in the Senate?
I think we're up to 13. We're trying to get it. We should be higher than that. Thanks for having me back, number one, and we're trying to get everybody.
Yeah, you said this is our last best chance to stop Obamacare, and I said that to Karl Rove last night. He disagreed with me.
Well, if you look at the way it starts to be implemented in October, it starts kicking in. I mean, the exchanges are supposed to go up, and I read today that Georgia has just, the latest state, they've actually applied for an emergency stay because they're not going to be able to be up and running by October 1st with their state exchange. So but all these the Medicare Advantage changes are going to start coming in October. That's going to hurt seniors. These mandates start kicking in shortly after that. So I just don't envision another time between now and the time Obamacare kicks in January 1st where we're really going to have a chance to put the brakes on this.
Now, I think it was Congressman Langford that said that a lot of this is mandatory, so for people to think that it's a total defunding of Obamacare is not true, but is it enough in terms of discretionary money to stop its implementation?
Well, two things. First of all, they can pass a budget, a short-term budget out of the House that includes in the language what they call a rider. That's just fancy language for a bill attached to the appropriations bill, language that basically says that Obamacare will be defunded. Now, obviously, in the Senate, the Democrats would oppose that, but they could do that out of the House, and it would be the only continuing resolution, the only short-term budget out there that has passed either one of the chambers. The other thing, however, is that we could go after things like the IRS agents not being implemented. I mean, they're the IRS, who, by the way, the employee union for the IRS has asked to be exempted from Obamacare, but they're in charge of enforcing the law, so they want to be exempted from the law that they're supposed to enforce. That being said, we could defund the IRS agents, the additional IRS agents. There's a lot. We can defund the exchanges. So there's a lot to be done that I think could significantly slow down the negative impact this law is going to have on our economy.
So as I was debating this with Rove last night, the issue came up. He said it's the worst law that has been passed in modern history, and it's a law that was passed on a foundation of lies. But then he said, but strategically, he doesn't think this is the right way to do it. Now, I disagree. I'm with you, Cruz, Lee, and Rand in the Senate. I agree with you four.
We have a law called ObamaCare. The president's not going to sign a bill to repeal it. So basically, this budget is the last chance I think we have to make a significant dent in slowing it down to hurt, because it's going to really hurt people. I don't have to convince your audience of that, but if we don't, how do we go back home to the people that elected us and say to them, I did everything I could to stop Obamacare, if people are prepared to vote for a budget that funds it?
Yeah, I heard now there's been rumors out there that the Senate leadership has gotten involved in the Republican side, and they've been asking people not to sign on to Mike Lee's effort. Is that true?
Well, I haven't heard that. I don't know that. I've read the same reports, but I don't know that to be the case. I think there's some debate about whether this is the right strategy, but the argument that I'm making to my colleagues is how can we say that we're against Obamacare and then turn around and vote for a budget that funds any part of it? I mean, that's the problem that we have here. I think in order for us to be able to say to people, we truly did everything we could, you've got to be able to draw a line in the sand on this. And by the way, Sean, if we're not willing to draw a line in the sand on Obamacare, what issue are we willing to draw a line in the sand on? I can't think of another issue right now that's hurting our country more.
Great minds think alike. I said the exact same thing. What does the Republican Party then stand for? If they don't stand against this, because they're making political calculations about what the outcome is going to be or the impact of the president threatening or following through on a shutdown, then what are they going to stand for?
Well, and that's exactly the right point, too, about the shutdown. It's the president. If we pass a short-term budget that does not fund Obamacare but funds the government, keeps it open, then the president's going to have a choice to make, and that choice is going to be, does he shut down the government simply because it doesn't fund his pet project? And that I think is the position. It's he who is threatening to shut down the government then.
Why is there such a fear to do this? Because of all the votes to repeal Obamacare that took place in the House, 30-some-odd votes to repeal it, every time they could have attached this to a continuing resolution where it would have defunded it, they didn't do it then. They only did it in moments where it was symbolic.
Yeah, I think the concern that some has is that at the end of the day, people will cave and it won't go through. You know, that in essence, this is something the Democrats will never go for, so why push them? And I ask myself, how come they never have to worry about that? How come the Democrats never say, this is something the Republicans aren't going to go for, so let's not push it? The truth is that, you know, we can debate a lot of different issues, but I think on Obamacare, that is the line in the sand. I mean, if we are not going to stand and fight on that issue and do everything we can to the very last second, it goes back to the question I asked earlier. What issue are we willing to do that on? I mean, what's this all for? Why are we even up here?
To me, this is the defining issue of our time. I actually think there will be huge fallout if, in fact, Republicans don't take this stand. I think the mood of the country is against it. When you have the three largest labor unions siding with you guys and making the argument that this is hurting rank and file workers in America, when you've got people that are being told that there are not going to be full-time jobs available because they don't want to be subject to the employer mandate, then we've got a problem that's impacting our entire economy with all this.
Yeah, I mean, so this is going to start to kick in. Seniors are going to lose benefits under Medicare Advantage. People are going to get moved from full-time to part-time work. They're going to lose the health insurance that they're happy with, the doctor that they have a long-standing relationship with. Businesses are not going to grow, so jobs aren't going to be added. I mean, these are all the real-life impacts that this is going to have. And when it does, we need to be able to say, look, we did everything we could to try to stop it. But if you vote for a budget that funds it, you can't say that. And that's my argument to our colleagues is, how can you say you're against Obamacare and then vote for a budget that actually funds any portion of it?
Yeah, well, we're going to see what's going to happen. I've not spoken to you since the immigration bill was passed and went on to the House.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what's going to happen there. There's been poll numbers showed that you've taken a big hit with conservatives and Tea Party activists. There's a lot of anger, as you know, directed your way. What is your reaction to that?
Well, look, I understand people are upset about it. I didn't believe me. I knew that ahead of time that was the real risk of getting involved in this. You and I discussed that. And I would just say to you that I didn't do it for political reasons. If there's any proof of it, look what's happening and the things you cite. So I get that, and I understand it. But I continue to make the argument I made before. Now, I think the House needs the space and time to do it the way they think is right. And quite frankly, I'm happy that we have a Republican House that's willing to consider what the right thing to do on this is. But what I continue to tell people is, if I came on this show, Sean, and I said that my plan for immigration was we weren't going to increase border security, we were not going to make an entry-exit system or E-Verify work, we were going to let 11 million people stay here who were here illegally, we weren't going to try to find out who they were, depending on where they work, maybe they pay taxes, maybe they don't. We weren't going to give them any federal benefits, but if they show up at our emergency room, they're going to get free medical care. If I described that to you as my plan, people would say that's a horrible plan. And my argument is, well, that's exactly what we have right now, and that's exactly what we're going to get stuck with if we don't do something. And that's why I got involved, certainly not for the politics of it. It would have been a lot easier to just sit back and poke holes at other people's ideas. But I still continue to feel strongly that what we have in place is very bad for the country, and I hope at some point we can fix it.
Why, from the very beginning, and I interviewed you early, you were saying border security first. The bill that we ended up with is not border security first.
Well, again, I think the debate is about before what, and I think at the end of the day, what I've made clear is the border security is an important element of it, and it has to happen before we make anyone who's in this country illegally permanently here. In the interim, while you're doing the border security, you have to account for the people that are here illegally, and that's why the bill gave them a temporary status. Now, the argument is, well, it isn't really temporary because once you give something, you can't take it back. But again, I would just argue to you that the only difference between what they have now and what they would have under the bill is that at least we'd know who they are and they'd have to be paying taxes. Right now, we don't know who they are, and they may or may not be paying taxes. But at the end, I think the border security part of the bill is important, and anything we do on illegal immigration should be linked to that actually being met, and that's what I hope the House will focus on.
If the House comes up with a bill, border security first, and they won't take up any other aspect of it, would you support that?
Well, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, border security is a obligation of the federal government, no matter what your illegal immigration problem may be. Even if you didn't have a single illegal immigrant, you'd still have to have effective border security because it goes down to your sovereignty. So I have no problem with doing border security. That alone won't solve our immigration problem, however. I think that we need to recognize that even if we did border security, eventually we're going to have to deal with the fact that we don't have E-Verify in place. Yeah. That's 40% of our illegal immigration are people that are overstaying. I would say border security, absolutely. If they just do a bill that does that, I would have supported that 2 years ago. I'd support that this year. But it doesn't solve the immigration problem.
John McCain yesterday said, if we can get this bill to conference, we can get rid of all those extra border agents that we don't need. And Bob Menendez actually said, and he was a member of the Gang of Eight, he spoke to the Center for American Progress, and he was explaining how the Democrats plan to get everything they want, including the amnesty, his words, for the 11 million illegal immigrants. He says, get the House to pass whatever immigration bill they like. Then it goes to conference. We'll fix that in conference, and we'll get our way.
Well, that's a fantasy. I don't think that's the way it can or will play out. First of all, I don't think that's what the House will do. I think the House is going to produce a product that they feel comfortable with and probably send it to the Senate and say, you consider this or nothing at all. And that's my sense of potentially what they might do. And if it's better than what we've produced, that's something we should go along with. But I don't think this notion that they're going to go to conference and then get their way is something that's feasible. And I think it's a fantasy.
What do you think about the president? And he's now out there campaigning, and he says he wants to have a big showdown with Republicans and conservatives over the issue of the budget and sequestration. What do you think of that?
Well, again, look, I'd much prefer to do entitlement reform because that's what's driving our national debt. I'd much prefer to do that. I mean, our national debt isn't being driven by defense spending. It's being driven by the fact that Medicare is structured in a way that's unsustainable. But I'm not going to trade what we have already in spending reductions for tax cuts, tax increases, which is what he's advocating. So I'd be more than happy to have a debate with the president about the fact that we're borrowing $34,000 a second, that we're borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar that we spend. This is unsustainable, and it's hurting job creation, and it's devastating for the middle class. So I think that should be the central debate of what we're doing up here for the next year or two.
Yeah. I think the president, if he wants to have this fight, I think maybe it's a fight worth having because, apparently they haven't learned the lesson on spending and how sequestration actually has helped reduce the $1 trillion deficits he was giving us every year.
Again, I mean, look, the preferable way to deal with the spending reductions is through entitlement reform because that's what's actually driving the debt. But in the absence of their willingness to do that, we have to do something, and that's why you have the sequester. And his whole point is that let's get rid of the sequester, but let's not do any spending reductions anywhere else, and then we'll raise a bunch of taxes, which, by the way, will hurt economic growth but won't generate nearly enough revenue to balance the budget. They're not serious about balancing the budget. He doesn't want to go down as the president that reduced the size of government. He wants to leave this problem for his successor, and in the meantime, the country's suffering because of it.
Yeah. What do you think about some of the foreign policy issues? Do you think it's a wise idea to give F-16s money to Egypt with all the instability that exists there?
No, I actually made the argument on the floor today that now is the time to completely restructure our foreign aid in general and in specific with regards to Egypt. Look, here's what we want in Egypt. We want our national security interests to be furthered, and that means a secular, democratic, and stable government that cooperates with counterterrorism, that lives up to the Camp David Accords with Israel, that protects religious minorities, and that provides internal security so their economy can prosper. And our foreign aid, if we're going to have any foreign aid to Egypt, it should be benchmarked on those conditions. In essence, they need to show measurable progress on each of those things or the aid stops. And it should be geared in terms of the type of aid. You don't need F-16s to live up to the Camp David Accords or to fight counterterrorism. That's not what you need. And so we're giving them stuff that they want, but not necessarily what they need from terms of our national interests. So our foreign aid should always follow our national interests. This is an opportunity to restructure that. I've actually been calling for that even before the Morsi government was removed, and I continue to call for that now.
I can't believe that we gave Morsi. I mean, literally, then not only did they help bring Morsi to power, but then they supported him almost to the bitter end. I mean, even when people were rising up against him, and this is a guy that viewed the Israelis as descendants of apes and pigs and was a 9/11 truther. I mean, I am beyond, words to say when a president would give a Muslim Brotherhood 9/11 truther F-16s and money and tanks. It's nuts.
Well, I think it's important to draw the distinction between the military and Morsi. He never controlled. It's not like here where the commander-in-chief controls the military. The military actually ended up removing him. But your point beyond that is well taken in the sense that Morsi almost immediately upon being elected began to govern undemocratically. That's the thing we forget. Democracy isn't just elections. You have to govern as a Democrat. And when you start oppressing religious minorities, when you start shutting down the courts, when you start going after the free press, when you start creating less and less space for your opposition to function, you are not governing democratically. And now this administration should have called that out a lot earlier than it did. It held out this naive hope that he was going to turn to some great reformer, and now you've seen the result of that, which is total chaos.
All right. Now, do you have any regrets getting involved in that immigration fight, or are you just beyond it now?
Well, I mean, in terms of regrets, I mean, you always want the bill to be better, and certainly, I mean, if I had written it all by myself, it wouldn't look the way it did. When you kind of deal with some of the people we have to in the Senate in order to get the process started, you're going to have things that you're not totally excited about. But on the other hand, I continue to believe, Sean, that what we have in place now is just terrible for the country, and on that I haven't, faltered. I mean, on that, I just continue to tell you that what we have today doesn't work. Now, it's not the most important issue America faces, but it's an important one, and I hope we can get it right and And I think that now it falls upon the conservatives over in the House to do the best they can to come up with a product that hopefully is better than what we did in the Senate, and hopefully be able to get something done that's good for the country. It's hard to do with this president. I will admit that. And if we had a different president, this would be a lot easier to do, but people just don't trust him, rightfully so, and they don't trust government or the administration, and it makes it very difficult to do anything significant when you don't have trust in your government. And I understand that, and that may be the reason why this has not gone the way so far the way many of us hoped it would have.
All right, Senator Rubio, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it. We'll talk again soon, especially as we head into these budget negotiations.